Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. You know we love to dig into all those things that make teams work better. And today, we're going to look at what makes those high-performing Agile teams tick.
You know the ones.
Yeah, those teams that just seem to get it all done, hit deadlines, innovate, and still have time for a coffee break. We've got some fascinating sources lined up to help us uncover those secrets. And you might be surprised to find out it's not all about autonomy and alignment.
That's right. Well, those are definitely super important. There's a third element that we see getting overlooked a lot, accountability. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so let's start with the familiar. We've all heard about empowering teams and giving them the freedom to act. But then how do you keep everyone rowing in the same direction?
Well, that's where alignment comes in. It's about making sure everyone has that shared understanding of the goals, the purpose, the big picture. One of our sources uses this powerful image of a project ending up miles apart from expectations after just 6 months. And it was all because of a tiny misalignment at the very beginning.
Wow, so even a small misalignment can have huge consequences down the line. It's like starting a road trip thinking everyone wants to go to the beach. But 6 months later, you end up in the mountains.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting.
hmm
It's not enough to simply be aligned internally as a team. Teams also need to be aware of the broader organizational ecosystem, including what the source calls non-functional constraints.
Non-functional constraints. Now that sounds a bit technical. Can you unpack that for us?
Absolutely. Think of it this way. You have your project goals, your deadlines, all the functional aspects.
Hmm.
But then you have the realities of things like security protocols,
Yeah.
budget limitations, legal requirements, those external factors that every team has to navigate. Those are your non-functional constraints.
Ah, so those things that can sometimes make you want to pull your hair out. But how do these constraints actually help teams scale effectively?
Well, these constraints, while sometimes frustrating, can actually help teams focus and prioritize resources and even come up with more creative solutions. Think of it like this. If you have an unlimited budget and no deadlines, it's easy to get sidetracked or lose momentum. But when you have to work within certain boundaries, it forces you to be more strategic and resourceful.
So those limitations can actually be a catalyst for innovation and efficiency. That's fascinating.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between pushing the boundaries and working within the necessary constraints. And this brings us to the heart of the matter today, accountability.
Because as our source points out, accountability is often treated as something that just magically happens. But high-performing teams recognize that it needs to be actively cultivated.
Right. The source argues for making accountability explicit, a conscious part of the team's culture, rather than something that's just assumed or implied. And that's where teams start to really differentiate themselves.
So instead of viewing accountability as something imposed from above, like constantly reporting progress to managers, high-performing teams flip the script, right?
Exactly. They shift the focus inward. Emphasizing accountability to each other first and foremost, it's about building that internal trust and ownership.
That makes sense. If you have a team where everyone is looking over their shoulder, worried about making mistakes, it's hard to feel truly accountable.
And this is where psychological safety comes into play. When team members feel safe to take risks, to admit mistakes, and to learn from each other, that's when true accountability can flourish.
So how do these high-performing teams actually make accountability explicit? Our source gives us a simple but powerful equation. Accountability equals transparency plus commitments. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Transparency is key because it builds trust. When teams are open about their goals, their progress, and even their challenges, it creates an environment where everyone feels more connected and responsible for the outcome.
So transparency sets the stage for accountability. But what about commitments? How do those play into the equation?
Commitments are more than just tasks or assignments. They represent a dedication to achieving a specific outcome, something the team genuinely believes in. It's about moving beyond simply doing the work to owning the results.
So it's not just about checking things off a to-do list. It's about being fully invested in the outcome, both the successes and the, let's say, learning experiences. But how do commitments differ from just regular tasks?
Well, commitments are about taking ownership. They're decided upon as a team, not imposed from above, which creates a stronger sense of responsibility and buy-in. Think about a time when you were given a task versus a time when you were part of a team that decided to commit to a specific goal. Which one felt more motivating?
That's a great point. It's about that sense of shared purpose and collective ownership. I'm guessing this is where we'll start to see the magic happen.
That's a great place to pick up in part two. We'll delve deeper into the power of commitments, how they drive performance, and how high-performing teams approach those inevitable moments when things don't go exactly as planned.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how those high-performing teams approach accountability in a whole new way by focusing on transparency and commitments. And you hinted that this is where the real magic starts to happen.
Yes, because when you combine transparency with those team-driven commitments, something really interesting happens. You shift from a culture of blame to a culture of learning.
So let's say a team makes a commitment but doesn't quite hit the mark. What happens then?
That's where the true power of this approach really shines. Instead of finger-pointing or dwelling on the mess, high-performing teams use it as a learning opportunity. They ask questions like, what went well? What could we have done differently? What can we learn from this experience?
So it's about embracing those moments of, let's call them productive struggle, and using them to get even better.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that this approach is rooted in psychological safety. Team members need to feel comfortable, being open and honest about what worked and what didn't, without fear of judgment or repercussions.
That makes sense. You can't have real accountability without that foundation of trust and openness. But let's go back to the idea of commitments for a moment. Our source mentioned that a 70–80% success rate on commitments is actually a good sign. That seems counterintuitive.
Right, it challenges that traditional mindset of always striving for 100% success. But the source makes a really compelling point. If you're hitting all your targets all the time, it might mean you're not pushing boundaries or taking enough risks. That 20–30% where things don't go perfectly as planned, those are valuable opportunities for growth and innovation.
So it's almost like those misses are built into the system as a way to encourage learning and experimentation.
Exactly. And the real magic is that the process itself, setting commitments, tracking progress, and reflecting on outcomes, becomes this incredible engine for continuous improvement.
It's a cycle of setting ambitious goals, putting in the effort, learning from the experience, and then using those learnings to set even bolder goals for the next cycle.
Yes, and all of this comes back to accountability. When teams are truly accountable to each other and to the commitments they've made, they create this incredible momentum that drives them forward.
So how can our listener, who might not be working in a traditional Agile environment, apply these principles? Because it seems like this goes beyond just software development or project management.
You're absolutely right. These principles are applicable in any setting where people are working together towards a shared goal. It starts with fostering transparency. How can you create an environment where information flows freely and everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas, progress, and even their struggles?
And then how can you work together to set those meaningful commitments that truly align with the team's goals and inspire everyone to strive for excellence?
Remember, commitments are most powerful when they come from the team itself, not imposed from above. So it's about having those open conversations, finding that shared sense of purpose, and then working together to define what success looks like.
And when those inevitable bumps in the road do appear, it's about seeing them as learning opportunities, not failures. Analyze what happened, extract the lessons, and adjust your approach accordingly.
And that's how high-performing teams thrive, by embracing accountability as a catalyst for both individual and collective growth. Now, where does all of this lead? What's the bigger picture here?
That's a great question. And the perfect way to kick off part 3. We'll explore the impact of accountability on team dynamics, leadership, and ultimately how it can unlock a level of performance that goes far beyond just checking boxes. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Always great to be back.
We've been exploring how those high-performing teams cultivate accountability, through transparency and commitments, and how all that fosters a culture of learning and growth. But now I kind of want to zoom out and look at the bigger picture here. How does all of this impact team dynamics and leadership?
Well, what's fascinating is that accountability doesn't just improve individual performance. It transforms the whole team dynamic.
Yeah.
It creates this sense of shared responsibility and
Mhm.
ownership, where everyone is totally invested in the success of the team as a whole.
It's like that feeling you get when you're all part of a sports team or a band. Everyone has their individual role to play, but you're all working together towards that common goal. You celebrate the wins together and you learn from the losses together.
Exactly. And that sense of shared purpose and collective ownership, it's so powerful. It really motivates people to go above and beyond, to support each other, and to constantly strive for excellence.
So if we think about this from a leadership perspective, it's not about, micromanaging or dictating every step. It's about creating those conditions where these high-performing teams can emerge organically.
It's not about giving orders. It's about fostering that environment of trust and transparency, where teams can really thrive.
It reminds me of that famous quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah,
You can have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if you don't have a culture that supports it, we're not going to get very far.
absolutely. And a culture of accountability is so essential for any high-performing team. And leaders model transparency, encourage open communication, and they celebrate both successes and learning experiences. It sets the tone for the entire team.
So to wrap things up, what's that one key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
Well, if we connect all this back to the core concepts we discussed, I think it becomes clear that accountability, driven by transparency and commitments, that's the key to unlocking true aligned autonomy. When teams have that freedom to act and the shared understanding of where they're going and the ownership to see it through, that's when the magic happens.
It's about creating that sweet spot where individual autonomy and collective alignment all come together to create something truly remarkable. It's about teams empowering themselves to define their own conditions for success and taking full ownership of their outcomes.
That's such a powerful idea. Think about how you can apply these principles of transparency, commitments, and accountability to your own team or projects.
Yeah.
Even if you're not working in that, traditional agile environment, it's a question worth reflecting on.
Absolutely. So until next time, everybody, keep diving deep, keep learning, and keep striving to build those high-performing, accountable teams that make a real difference.